They have different forms and functions. So one of the issues is that we often refer to a bunch of these things as angels. Angel is not what the thing is, it's what the thing does. So
Listen, I want to get to one more main topic in here, and then we're going to do a Patreon episode. There's going to be stuff in there. We'll talk about the Templars. We'll talk about evolution. We'll talk about the biblical timeline and all that. But on the actual episode here, just because we talked about it earlier and got off it and said we come back, some of the other banned books, quote unquote, of the Bible. You got things like the Book of Enoch, Nephilim. My buddy Mark Gagnon actually just did an episode with a guy that I haven't seen yet that's like popping off where they went into all this. So I got to check that out. Everyone check out Camp Gagnon. Great show. But like, let's start with Enoch. Like, what's the history there, and what's like the arguments against that being a part of the Bible?
Yeah, so we've talked about a number of documents that would fall into the category of apocryphal literature. And so apocrypha, the Greek word apokryphos just means secret or strange, and it becomes sort of the categorical term within early Christianity to describe anything outside of that which is canonical. So the canon is what's considered scripture, everything else is apocryphal. That doesn't necessarily mean it's heretical, but it just means it's in a separate category. Within the category of apocryphal, you also have documents that are sometimes referred to as pseudepigraphical, right? So think of pseudo, like a pseudonym, right? It's not your real name. Pseudo and graphe. It's a strange writing. It's not your, like pseudo means false, and then graphe means writing. So pseudepigraphical documents are documents like the Book of Enoch, which have a label of being written by a particular individual who it's largely agreed upon is not the individual. And so that's in a category of its own. The thing with Enoch is that it was never considered banned. It was always part of a group of Jewish literature, which was very important within sort of the Jewish understanding. So we've largely been talking almost exclusively, I think, about documents that post-date the New Testament documents. Right? So the Gospels that were written by the various Gnostic groups, those are after Jesus. Enoch comes before Jesus, and it's in a category of literature that was written between the last book of the Old Testament and the first book of the New Testament. So there's about 400 years there between, I mentioned in the Protestant Old Testament, you have the last book is Malachi. Between Malachi and Matthew, there's a 400-year gap, which is sometimes referred to as the 400 years of silence, which is a bit of a misnomer because it wasn't silent. There was a whole bunch of Jewish literature being written, but there was this cultural understanding within ancient Judaism that the voice of God was not being communicated through prophets in the same way. So that's why it's sometimes referred to as that. However, the Jews are writing all sorts of things. And one of those things that they are writing on was the Book of Enoch. Now, we also need to be careful with the Book of Enoch because what we call specifically First Enoch, there's a First and Second Enoch. When the Book of Enoch is usually referred to, it's usually referred to, we're usually pointing to the Book of First Enoch. The Book of First Enoch, as it exists, you can go buy a copy of First Enoch. In fact, there's a pretty recent, very good translation of it by the publisher Hermania, which is the most updated one, takes into consideration things like the Dead Sea Scrolls. And what you have there is a collection of various Jewish texts that span about a period of 200 years before Jesus and about 50 to 100 years after Jesus in multiple languages. So you have sections of the Book of Enoch in Aramaic, you have sections in Coptic, and you have sections in Greek. And those are all brought together in what we call First Enoch. Now, the old sections are really, really old. The old sections are about 200 BC. They're in the 3rd century BC, and they're largely written in Aramaic and Greek. And those predate Jesus by a ways, and actually the New Testament shows recognition of it. In the book of Jude, it refers to a section of the Book of Enoch. So it's present in the Bible. Now, that doesn't mean they thought it was scripture, because we know unanimously they did not think it was scripture. Jude is simply referring to a piece of literature that they would have been familiar with to make a particular argument. Paul also quotes Menander, the Greek philosopher. He didn't think Menander was divinely inspired. He's just using the literature of the day to make particular arguments. But when we're talking about the Book of Enoch, Jewish scripture occasionally refers to supernatural beings, like angels, like seraphim, like cherubim, like demons. But it doesn't really, or the watchers is another one.
Jinn?
No,
that's different.
That's
Islam.
Yeah, that comes along. That's about 600 years after.
Beck Lover somewhere is like, God damn it, Julian.
Yeah, no, the jinn are a separate thing. That they're
Got it.
Entirely. They're good and bad jinn. They're not even in this sort of category. But so you have these things mentioned in the Old Testament, but they're never really explained. And so within this 400-year period between the Old and the New Testament, the Jews are like, okay, what do we think of this? How are we to understand these supernatural beings that are created by God, that exist in some sort of parallel world in the unseen realm, and they're interacting with one another, and they have different forms and functions? So one of the issues is that we often refer to a bunch of these things as angels. Angel is not what the thing is, it's what the thing does. So malach in the Hebrew, or angelos in the Greek, means messenger. So it is not a description of its ontology, what it is, it's a description of what it does.
Got it.
These are supernatural beings who go and they communicate messages to people. They're in some sort of relation in terms of their supernaturalness to other creatures like the seraphim and like the cherubim, who are supernatural divine throne guardians, which was a concept that was not foreign to the ancient world. You have Lamassu, which are the winged bulls with the human heads in Babylon, and you have sphinxes in Egyptian and Hellenistic culture. These were just concepts that existed within the ancient world. The gods have throne guardians. And within biblical Judaism, these are the seraphim and they are the cherubim. So sometimes you'll see those memes, the biblically accurate angels.
Yeah.
Those are cherubim. That's what they are.
Okay.
It's not actually an angel. It's kind of a misnomer in terms. But I get it, because we kind of broad brush with all these categories. The book of Enoch is part of the literature that's trying to explain that. What on earth is this? Actually, if you go back to my wesleyhuff.com, so every Monday I do these posts that I call Manuscript Monday. So if you go back to the homepage, click that, scroll down, you'll see the blog post. Keep going. Right there. So biblically accurate angels. So I actually explain some of these. If you go down, go up, right there. So like angels, seraphim, cherubim, and then how these are portrayed. And I particularly go through the manuscripts and how both Christian and Jewish interpretation of them reflects them differently. But these are these characters which the book of Enoch is trying to make sense of, along with demons. And so the way that they go about that is by capitalizing on the events that happen immediately before Genesis chapter 6 and the biblical flood, where you have the great-grandfather of Noah, Enoch, as this character who is explaining some of these fallen angels or beings. Genesis chapter 6 says that the sons of God saw that the daughters of men were pleasing to the eyes and slept with them. And that these created men of renown. And that's the word Nephilim.
Ah, there it is.
So the trickiness of this is that in ancient Judaism, when it's translated into other languages, Nephilim is almost exclusively translated as giants. But the word etymologically in Hebrew, nephal, literally means to fall. So there's this whole narrative within ancient Judaism of these things are fallen angels. And so, but that's not the same thing necessarily in ancient Judaism as demons, and that's where it gets complicated.
Okay, so I'm just reading the background here so people have it. The Nephilim, let me pull this over here so it's on the screen. The Nephilim are mysterious beings or people in the Bible traditionally imagined as being of great size and strength. The origins of the Nephilim are disputed. Some, including the author of the book of Enoch, view them as the offspring of fallen angels and humans. Others view them as descendants of Seth and Cain. The reference to them is Genesis 6:1-4. But the passage is ambiguous, and the identity of the Nephilim is disputed. According to the Numbers 13:33, 10 of the 12 spies report the existence of Nephilim in Canaan prior to the conquest by the Israelites. A similar or identical biblical Hebrew term read as Nephilim by some scholars, or as the word fallen by others, appears in the Ezekiel 32:27 and is also mentioned in the Deuterocanonical books: Judith 16:6, Sirach 16:7, Baruch 3:26-28, and Wisdom 14:6.
Yeah, so let me read that for us. When men began to multiply on the face of the land, the daughters of them were born. The sons of God saw that the daughters of men were attractive, and they took as their wives any they chose. Then Yahweh said, My spirit shall not abide in man forever, for he is flesh. His days shall be 120 years. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God came into the daughters of men, and they bore children to them. These were mighty men who were of old, men of renown. So that's literally what the Hebrew says. And so it's not like the Wikipedia article accurately says, it's not entirely clear what's going on there. But Enoch is part of the Jewish conversation in trying to flesh this out. And particularly in the Book of the Watchers, which is the oldest book. And so that's what Enoch is. Now, part of the confusion about the Book of Enoch is because the Book of Enoch is never considered scripture by the Jews, but ends up in the Ethiopian Bible. And part of
Ethiopian Bible.
Yeah, so the Ethiopian Orthodox Church is like a wing of, you have these different sort of overarching denominations of Christendom. You have today Protestants, Eastern Orthodox, Coptic, Roman Catholic, and then the Ethiopian Church. And the Ethiopian Church, we know that around the 4th century, missionaries from Syria went down to what then was referred to as the Kingdom of Aksum, which is in modern-day Ethiopia, and they brought with them a whole host of literature. And part of this literature was New Testament books in Greek and the Septuagint, the Greek translation of the Old Testament, which at that point was finalized. And the Ethiopian church took all of this literature, which included literature that nobody considered scripture at the time, and they appear to have just been non-discretionary and included everything. So all of the debates that were happening in the Latin West and the Greek East about what was and wasn't scripture, they looked at that and they said, we're not really interested in that. We'll just take everything. So in being non-discretionary, they end up just canonizing everything, which leaves them with a canon of scripture that is completely unique and includes books like Enoch, which the ancient Jews and every ancient Christian didn't, well, actually, I should preface that. There were a couple of early Christians who said, we think this could be scripture, but then they accept when, all the debates happen that, okay, those are pretty good reasons we're not going to accept it in the end. And so I don't know where the idea came from, but there is definitely a prevailing myth on the internet that the Ethiopian Bible is the oldest Bible. And that's not true. In fact, the oldest copy of the Ethiopian Bible, which is full in terms of a Genesis to Revelation copy, is 14th century. So it's a long, long time after.
Shit.
But there's a lot of talk online about Enoch, and particularly the copy of Enoch that is in the Ethiopian Bible, and that, that's actually reflective of the original Bible because the Ethiopian Bible is the oldest. I don't know how that myth started. It's patently untrue. But what ends up being what we call the Book of Enoch ends up in its final form in the Ethiopic canon.
There's a lot on the bone today, man.
Yeah.
A lot of stuff.
Sorry about that. I'm opening up the fire hose.
Sorry,
and
that's exactly what we want. We want the fire hose coming out. I really appreciate you sharing so much knowledge. I'm sure people will have all kinds of opinions online in the comment sections and stuff, but all of ancient history where it ties into religion and ideas and how we formulate it today, because it all comes back to today. It's so fascinating to me. So I appreciate guys like you coming in here and doing this. We're going to go do a Patreon episode now. I went through some of those topics. We'll definitely get into the Templars and some of the things in the Middle Ages that I think are interesting when you look at the history of the Christian church. And some other stuff, including evolution. So people, if you want to join on Patreon or YouTube membership, you can hit that link in the description below. That's down there. But we will have your links as well down below, Wes, so
Appreciate
people
that.
can follow you on Instagram. We'll have your website as well. And I appreciate you coming here from Toronto to do it, brother.
I appreciate you giving me a platform. My wife is certainly bored of hearing all this stuff. So.
She better listen to this one, though.
That's
now
right.
That you're here. Anyway, we'll do it again sometime. All right?
Sounds good.
All right. Everybody else, you know what it is. Give it a thought. Get back to me. Peace. Thank you guys for watching the episode. Before you leave, please be sure to hit that subscribe button and smash that like button on the video. It's a huge help. And also, if you're over on Instagram, be sure to follow the show at Julian Dorey Podcast, or also on my personal page at Julian D. Dorey. Both links are in the description below. Finally, if you'd like to catch up on our latest episodes, use the Julian Dorey Podcast playlist link in the description below. Thank you. Thank you for watching the video, guys. If you haven't already subscribed, please smash that subscribe button and check out this clip's full podcast episode by clicking here